was the consensus of archaeologists that no megalithic architecture had been found anywhere in the world that was more than 6,000 years old. They said, show us another culture that's 12,000 years old anywhere in the world, and we might listen to you. Evidence from much earlier megalithic construction is hiding in plain view. Our understanding of prehistory must change.
Thousands of years before modern machinery, before steel tools, before anything we'd call advanced engineering, ancient people were moving stones that weigh more than most buildings, shaping them, stacking them, and doing it with a precision that still doesn't have a satisfying explanation.
They're all fitted together with this incredible level of precision. It almost looks as though they've been melted together. Even using today's technology, where would you start? How was this done?
But the more you dig into these structures, the stranger things get. So, how was it done? We are going to start with the one that broke the entire timeline of human history. Gobekli Tepe, Turkey. The standard story of civilization goes like this. First, humans figured out farming, then they settled down, built villages, created surplus food, developed religion, and eventually got organized enough to build temples. That was the timeline everyone agreed on for decades. And then a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt started digging in southeastern Turkey in 1995 and blew the entire sequence apart. Gobekli Tepe sits about 10 miles northeast of the city of Şanlıurfa, and radiocarbon dating places its earliest construction between 9,600 and 8,200 BCE. That makes it older than Stonehenge by more than 6,000 years, older than the Great Pyramid by about 7,000, and older than the invention of pottery itself. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers who lived without fixed settlements, had no access to metal, and depended entirely on wild game and foraged plants to survive. They had stone tools in their bare hands, and somehow they quarried T-shaped limestone pillars weighing between 10 and 20 tons, hauled them up a hill, and arranged them in large circular enclosures with detailed carvings of foxes, scorpions, vultures, and abstract human figures on the surfaces. And the construction was way more sophisticated than anyone expected. A study published in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal used computer modeling and found that the entire site was actually designed as a single unified complex using geometric planning, which is a level of coordination that nobody thought pre-agricultural societies were capable of. Schmidt believed nomadic bands traveled to this spot regularly, built these structures together, and celebrated with feasts of wild game and beer brewed from wild grasses. Over 100,000 wild animal bones have been found at the site, mostly from gazelle and aurochs, along with evidence of wild cereal processing, which paints a picture of massive communal gatherings centered around food, ritual, and construction. So, this was a place of gathering, possibly the earliest organized religion on Earth. And it existed thousands of years before anyone thought that kind of social organization was possible. But here is where it gets really strange. Around 8,000 BCE, the builders deliberately buried the entire complex under tons of rubble and soil. Lower enclosures were filled in, stones were repurposed, and new structures were built on top, layer after layer, until the whole site became a rounded mound. Some archaeologists believe this was a form of ritualistic closure, like decommissioning a sacred space so that no one could accidentally disturb whatever power they believed lived there. Others argue the burial may have been natural, caused by collapse and erosion over centuries. Either way, as of 2021, less than 5% of the site has been excavated. Whatever else is under that hill, we have barely started looking. Puma Punku, Bolivia. From the oldest temple on Earth, we go to one of the most precisely engineered, and it sits at 12,800 feet above sea level on the Bolivian Altiplano near Lake Titicaca. Puma Punku is part of the larger Tiwanaku complex, and it dates to around 500 CE. But age is not the reason Puma Punku is here, because this site is all about precision. The site is defined by its H-shaped interlocking blocks, and each of those blocks has approximately 80 individual faces. Every single one matches the others with such accuracy that you cannot fit a piece of paper between the joints. The grooves cut into these blocks have non-parallel walls engineered to create dovetailed joints, and some surfaces contain perfectly drilled holes with 6mm spacing that looks almost machine-made. The largest stone on the platform weighs an estimated 131 metric tons and is made from red sandstone quarried about 6 miles away. But the smaller andesite blocks used for the detailed carvings came from quarries on the Copacabana Peninsula, roughly 56 miles away across Lake Titicaca. What makes this even harder to wrap your head around is the altitude. At nearly 13,000 feet, no trees grow, so wooden rollers were out of the question. Unfinished stones found at the site show they were pounded with stone hammers to create rough shapes, then slowly ground and polished with flat stones and sand until the surfaces were smooth. Some joints were reinforced with copper fasteners, some of them cold hammered and others poured in molten. So we know what tools they used, and we know the techniques. The part that does not add up is how you achieve that level of uniformity across dozens of blocks, at that altitude, with those tools, in the thin air of the Andes. That is the question that keeps archaeologists and engineers coming back to this site. And so far, nobody has answered it completely. Kailasa Temple, India. But if precision at altitude sounds difficult, try carving an entire temple downward through solid rock with zero margin for error. The Kailasa Temple is Cave 16 of the Longyou Caves in western Maharashtra, India, and it is the largest monolithic rock-cut structure in the world, attributed to Rashtrakuta King Krishna I, who ruled from about 756 to 773 CE. The temple was carved from the top down, out of a vertical basalt cliff in the Sharanandri Hills. Workers started at the roof and chiseled their way to the base, and by the time they were done, they had removed somewhere between 200,000 and 400,000 tons of volcanic rock, using nothing but hammers and chisels. The finished structure covers about 276 feet in length and 154 feet in width, and rises roughly 107 feet high. There is a local Marathi legend, recorded in a 13th century text called the Katha Kalpataru, that says the king of Elapura fell gravely ill, and his queen prayed to Lord Shiva and vowed to build a temple in his honor if the king recovered. She also vowed she would fast until she could see the temple's crown. Because a standard ground-up construction would have taken years before the top was visible, the architects began at the roof instead, so the queen could break her fast as soon as possible. Whether the story is true or not, the top-down carving method is confirmed by archaeologists, and the interior is covered floor to ceiling with sculptures of Hindu deities, relief panels from the Ramayana, and ornamental carvings on nearly every visible surface. And the truly mind-bending part is this: when you build a temple from the ground up, you can swap a damaged block, redo a column, or adjust an angle. When you carve downward through living rock, every chisel strike is permanent. One cracked pillar halfway through could ruin months or even years of work with absolutely no way to fix it. Archaeologists have estimated that a project of this scale should have taken well over 100 years to complete, but historical records suggest it was finished in approximately 18 years. If that number is even close to accurate, it would mean workers were removing roughly 5 tons of rock every single hour around the clock for almost 2 decades. And they did it without a single structural failure, with every pillar standing intact at the end of it. The Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb reportedly sent 1,000 men to destroy the temple in 1682, and after 3 full years of trying, all they managed to do was disfigure a few statues. Derinkuyu, Turkey. In 1963, a man in the Cappadocia region of Turkey was renovating his home when he knocked through a basement wall and found a room behind it. That room led to a tunnel, which led to another room, and another, and another. What he had accidentally opened up was the entrance to the deepest known underground city on Earth. Derinkuyu descends roughly 85 meters into soft, tough rock, which is about 280 feet straight down. 8 levels have been confirmed and excavated, though researchers believe the total could reach as high as 18. At full capacity, the city sheltered up to 20,000 people for months at a time, and it had everything they needed to survive: wine and oil presses, food storage rooms, kitchens, stables for livestock on the upper floors, a missionary school on the second level, and a large cruciform church carved between the third and fourth floors. Over 600 hidden entrances were built into the courtyards and private homes of the surface-level town above. But the engineering that really sets Derinkuyu apart is the defensive design. More than 15,000 ventilation shafts penetrate through the rock, most of them only about 4 inches wide, and they were distributed so that an attacker could never poison the air supply from a single point. The water wells were hidden deep below ground level, so enemies who tried to poison the wells were actually just pouring poison down empty ventilation ducts. And at every level, massive circular stone doors carved from single pieces of rock, weighing between 400 and 1,000 pounds, could be rolled into place from the inside to seal off each floor independently. A 9-kilometer tunnel is even believed to connect Derinkuyu to the nearby underground city of Kaimakli. Today, only 10% of Derinkuyu is open to visitors. The temperature underground stays a constant 55 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, meaning it was cool in the blistering Cappadocian summers and warm during the freezing winters. The other 90% remains sealed behind rock walls that nobody has looked behind yet. The Longyou Caves, China. On June 9, 1992, 4 farmers in Zhejiang Province, China, decided to drain some ponds that the locals had always believed were bottomless. They pumped water for 17 days, and what they found underneath were not ponds at all. They were the flooded entrances to 24 massive hand-carved caverns, cut into solid siltstone beneath Phoenix Hill. The total area of those caves covers roughly 30,000 square meters, with ceilings reaching up to 100 feet high in places, supported by evenly spaced stone pillars. Every surface of every cave is covered in uniform parallel chisel marks, each groove about 60 centimeters long, running in the same direction across walls, ceilings, and columns. The estimated age puts construction at over 2,000 years ago, probably before the Qin dynasty established itself in 221 BCE. The historical record is completely silent on these caves. Chinese civilization documented practically everything it touched, from tax collections to astronomical observations, and yet these 24 caverns do not appear in a single surviving manuscript or oral tradition of any kind. For a civilization that documented practically everything from tax records to military campaigns to the movements of stars, the complete silence around these caves is genuinely strange. They have been called the 9th wonder of the ancient world in China, ranked right after the Great Wall and the Terracotta Army. The excavation required the removal of nearly 1 million cubic meters of rock, which would have needed roughly 1,000 workers laboring day and night for 6 years. The site yielded no tools, construction debris has never been found in the surrounding area, and nobody has explained where that million cubic meters of removed stone actually went. Theories range from underground military barracks to mining operations to some kind of massive water management system. But none of them explain why every wall was decorated with identical, carefully patterned chisel marks that serve no structural purpose at all. Sacsayhuaman, Peru. The Inca fortress of Sacsayhuaman overlooks Cusco from about 12,000 feet up in the Peruvian Andes, and it was built in the 15th century under Emperor Pachacuti. The defining feature is a 3-tiered zigzag wall that stretches over 1,300 feet and rises up to about 60 feet high. The stones are massive irregular boulders of andesite and limestone, some weighing over 200 tons, and every single one is cut to fit its neighbors with as many as 12 or more angles per block. No mortar holds them together. The fitting is so tight, you cannot slide a razor blade between the joints. Cusco sits in one of the most seismically active zones on the planet. Spanish colonial buildings in the city below have collapsed repeatedly through centuries of earthquakes. Sacsayhuaman has barely moved. After the Spanish conquest, colonists actually dismantled large portions of Sacsayhuaman and used the stones to build churches, mansions, and government buildings in Cusco. Those stolen stones now sit in colonial walls that crack and crumble every time the ground shakes, while the original Inca walls they were ripped from are still standing. Modern engineering analysis has confirmed that the polygonal interlocking construction absorbs seismic energy far more efficiently than straight-edge masonry, which is a principle that contemporary architects are only now beginning to study for earthquake-resistant design. The Inca achieved this using only stone implements, had no written language to plan any of it, and had no animal capable of hauling 200-ton boulders up a mountainside. Evidence suggests they placed stones side by side and rubbed them together with sand as an abrasive until the surfaces matched perfectly, which is an incredibly slow and labor-intensive process that somehow produced walls more durable than anything modern concrete has managed in the same region. Nan Madol, Micronesia. Off the eastern coast of the island of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia, sitting on submerged coral reefs in a tropical lagoon, is a city of 92 artificial islands connected by canals wide enough to serve as roads. And here is the thing that makes it almost absurd. This city was entirely dependent on neighboring islands for both food and drinking water, having neither of its own. Everything the residents needed to survive had to be brought in from other islands. So somebody went through the trouble of building an entire stone city on a coral reef in the open ocean, and then had to supply it from elsewhere just to keep people alive there. Nan Madol, which means spaces between, was the ceremonial capital of the Sudler dynasty, and construction began around 1180 CE and continued for about 4 centuries. The foundations were built from massive basalt boulders, with walls constructed from the columnar basalt logs stacked in a crisscross pattern and filled with coral rubble. Some of those walls reached 49 feet high and 16 feet thick. The total weight of basalt moved to build the entire city is estimated at 750,000 metric tons. Archaeologist Rufino Mauricio calculated that a population of fewer than 30,000 people moved an average of 1,850 tons per year for 400 years. They did this using purely human strength and coordination, with stone tools and whatever watercraft they could build, and nothing in their material culture that functioned as a wheel. The basalt columns were quarried from a volcanic plug at Soques on the far side of Pohnpei and transported more than 25 miles to the reef. How they moved 50-ton stones over land, loaded them onto some kind of watercraft, floated them across open ocean, and then stacked them on a submerged coral reef is a question that no one has definitively answered. The local Pohnpeian explanation is that twin sorcerers named Olisihpa and Olosopa arrived from a mythical western land, built an altar to the god of agriculture, and levitated the stones into place using a flying dragon. That is the best explanation the people who actually live there can offer. And honestly, the archaeological community has not come up with anything much more satisfying. Fantasy writer H.P. Lovecraft was so fascinated by these ruins that his description of the sunken city of R'lyeh in The Call of Cthulhu was directly inspired by Nan Madol. The Venice of the Pacific earned its nickname, and it did it on a coral reef in the middle of nowhere. The unfinished obelisk, Aswan, Egypt. The unfinished obelisk lies in a granite quarry in Aswan, Egypt. It was commissioned by Queen Hatshepsut during the 18th dynasty, and if it had been completed, it would have stood about 137 feet tall and weighed roughly 1,200 tons. That is the weight of about 800 cars. It would have been the single largest obelisk ever raised in the ancient world by a wide margin. But partway through the carving process, a massive crack split through the granite, and the entire project was abandoned where it lay. That crack, though, turned into one of the most valuable archaeological discoveries Egypt ever produced. Because the obelisk was never moved, the quarry preserves exactly how the workers operated. Thousands of dolerite pounding balls have been found scattered across the site, a volcanic rock even harder than granite, each weighing between 4 and 12 pounds. Workers lifted these stones and smashed them against the granite surface over and over, pulverizing the rock grain by grain rather than cutting it in any traditional sense. To separate the obelisk from the bedrock, they carved small cavities along a line, hammered in sun-dried wooden wedges, and then soaked those wedges with water until the expanding wood cracked the granite free, like tearing a piece of paper along a perforated edge. The carving method is clear. The separation method is clear. What remains completely unexplained is the next step: how they intended to transport 1,200 tons of granite to the Nile, load it onto a barge without sinking it, float it downriver, and somehow raise it upright at the entrance of a temple without the entire thing snapping in half under its own weight. Stonehenge, England. Now, this one you have definitely heard of, but there is a detail about Stonehenge that most people have never been told, and it changes the way you think about the entire site. Stonehenge was constructed in stages over roughly 1,500 years, beginning around 3000 BCE on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire. The outer ring of large sarsen sandstone blocks, each about 25 tons and 13 feet tall, was erected around 2500 BCE, and those stones were quarried from the Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles away. The lintels sitting on top are held in place with mortise and tenon joints, which is a woodworking technique applied to stone, and it is unique among megalithic monuments of that entire era. The larger trilithon stones inside the circle may weigh up to 45 tons. The inner ring and horseshoe of smaller bluestones, weighing up to 4 tons each, were hauled roughly 150 miles from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales. Researchers from University College London confirmed the exact quarry sites and found evidence that the bluestones may have originally belonged to an earlier stone circle in Wales that was dismantled and rebuilt here. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. Researchers from the Royal College of Art tested bluestone samples from the Preseli Hills and discovered that a significant number of them are what scientists call ringing rocks. When you strike them with a hammerstone, they produce a clear, metallic, bell-like tone, almost like hitting a piece of metal. Several of the source stones in Wales still show impact marks from centuries of deliberate striking. The hypothesis proposed by researchers at Bournemouth University and the University of Bristol is that Stonehenge may have been as much an acoustic monument as an astronomical one. The builders may have dragged those specific stones 150 miles across Neolithic Britain because of the sound they made. That reframes the entire site. It means Stonehenge may have been something far more than a calendar or a burial ground. It was possibly a place where stones could sing. The Treasury of Atreus, Greece. The Treasury of Atreus, also called the Tomb of Agamemnon, sits at the archaeological site of Mycenae in the Greek Peloponnese. It was built around 1250 BCE as a beehive tomb, or tholos, for a Mycenaean ruler whose actual identity has never been confirmed. You approach through a long ceremonial passageway called the Dromos, roughly 118 feet long and 20 feet wide, lined on both sides with cut stone blocks that get taller as you walk deeper. At the far end sits the doorway, and balanced above it is a single stone lintel that measures 29.5 feet long, 16.5 feet deep, and 3 feet high, weighing an estimated 120 tons. That stone was placed there in the Bronze Age, and it has stayed perfectly balanced ever since. The entrance was once flanked by carved marble columns brought from the Mani Peninsula in the southern Peloponnese, and above the lintel sat a relieving triangle decorated with red and green stone plaques, most of which have faded or been removed over the centuries. Inside, the burial chamber opens into a corbelled dome built from overlapping rings of stone, each course stepping slightly inward from the one below, rising to meet at a single capstone at the top. The dome is approximately 14.5 meters across and 13.5 meters high, and when it was completed, it became the largest dome on Earth. It held that title for over 1,000 years until the Romans built the Pantheon. The Mycenaeans achieved this entirely in dry stone, relying on geometry and weight distribution rather than mortar or concrete, and doing so centuries before Roman engineers developed the mathematical frameworks that would explain why the structure holds. The blocks decrease in size as they ascend, each one precisely calculated to push weight outward and downward, holding the whole thing in compression so that gravity actually strengthens the structure instead of collapsing it. It is the kind of engineering that looks obvious after someone else has done it, but try building one from scratch by hand with no engineering precedent and no margin for error if the apex caves in during construction. The Treasury of Atreus is proof that the people who lived 3,200 years ago in a Greek hilltop understood forces that modern engineering students still study in textbooks today. The people responsible left behind no names and no record of how they planned it. From a hunter-gatherer temple buried in Turkish soil to a Bronze Age dome in the hills of Greece, these 10 structures share one thing. They were all built by people who, according to everything we thought we knew about their time, should not have been able to pull it off. And yet the stones are still standing, the joints still hold, the walls still resist earthquakes, and the domes have stayed up for millennia. Maybe the real mystery here is not how they did it. Maybe it is why we keep underestimating the people who came before us. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, and you can check out another one on screen right now.